Great. And Jay, you and Bob will watch the feed.
Yeah,
And
Okay.
everybody should just go ahead and mute, right, Vince?
yeah.
Sure. Well, actually, you can, but my suggestion would be that whenever there's a comment, just chime in. You don't have to use the chat. I'm fine with being interrupted whenever you want to, and I'm not going to be able to watch the admits, so I'll let you guys do that.
Sure.
Can you see my Lightroom screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just a couple fast comments before we get started. I wrote something about making prints in the last newsletter, and that's one of them. You can see for these smaller portfolio type prints, the border that I have, all my borders are the same, and they go into a portfolio book like this. Dan Berg does all of my printing. Dan's a member of the club and a professional printer of extremely high quality. And it is just a really neat thing for me to have at my fingertips to be able to take out of the sleeves and look at my prints, in addition to those I have hanging on the wall. I would urge everyone to consider printing if you're not doing it. And you don't have to do it yourself. There are people like Dan around to do it. But it's really quite special to have a print, not just your computer screen. And in reference to prints, I'm a big fan of calibration. This is the Calibrite Display Plus HL that I use every time I'm about to do any kind of major editing in Lightroom. So that assures me that my colors are set properly and that my exposure on my Apple display hasn't gotten too bright to mess up my prints when they go out to Dan Berg. So that's just a little background comment. And again, please interrupt. This is the first time I've given this talk. Hopefully it will go well. I've spent as much time preparing this one as I had prepared my medical talk. So this was quite a process. But as I said to my wife tonight, in doing these talks, the person who gives the talk probably learns the most. It really solidifies the knowledge. It puts everything together. It forced me to carefully go finish up the files of a particular trip where most of these images have come from. And they had been sitting for a couple months, the last bunch of them. I got a lot of benefit from doing it, and I'm happy that we have such a nice turnout tonight. What I'm going to be addressing is focus stacking, that is correct, but not in the classic sense. The parameters can be used that way, but what I've gotten turned on to is a more creative use of, as I would call it, a creative use of focus stacking. And I think you'll see what I mean as we go along. The classic way focus stacking has been used for many years, going back to when I was shooting film. And going back, actually, I wrote a little piece about the first HDR image that was in the like 1870 or so, where a photographer took multiple images and blended them and stacked them together in his darkroom. So the typical way that focus stacking would be used would be for a grand landscape that has a foreground, a big branch or an object that you want in focus, a middle ground and a background, and you need this hundreds of feet in focus. And you could use the hyperfocal distance on your lens, or you could take multiple focus points, 3, 4, 5, and blend them together. So I'm not really doing that so much. It also is classically used in macro photography of bugs, where people want everything front to back maximum focus. And you just can't do that other than with focus stacking. But I'm going to be using a selective focus stack technique that we'll go through tonight. Many cameras have this process built into them. I'm shooting with a Canon R5 right here. And this R5 using the menus on the back, it's very simple to pop into the let the camera automatically fire away at a focus stack, and we'll talk about that in the second half of my talk. Jay, we have about 4 hours, right?
Yep. 3.5.
3.5 now. So my philosophy has always been I would rather cover less material and cover it deeply and well, so that when you go away, whatever the topic, you understand fully what I've talked about, as opposed to trying to zoom through everything and then you have to go back and try to figure out what was just said. So we'll see how far we go. I have some other topics to hit at the end if it's not too late. Many cameras have automatic focus stacking features in them where you hit a button and it will shoot off 20, 100, 900 images. I would urge, if your camera has that, as my R5 by Canon does, do not let the camera stack those images for you and then give you a blended output, because that's not what this process is going to be about. Just let the camera store all the individual files and then you process those, as we'll talk about tonight, in your software. So I got started really heavily in this when I shot this image. This is one of them. And this is a macro image. This was done, and you're going to see little things pop up to tell you what the image is about on the upper left-hand corner. And I'll put the parameters, the technical parameters. And the technical stuff will be more in the second half of this talk. But this is a kind of a typical flower macro shot. It's a macro, it's done with extension tubes with my 70-200. Another macro of that passion flower from San Francisco. And a third macro, trying to make the macros different, a little more creative. And these are all single shots. But then I did this shot on the fly, really. And this was a manual, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was a manual stack without a tripod. Almost everything I show you tonight will be tripod. This one was not. And the ticket with doing a manual focus stack is to fire away on high-speed continuous mode and set your near field and don't change the focus, and then move the camera toward the back of the subject with the camera firing away continuously. And now from that series, you can pick what you want later in processing. So you'll see here, I have the information that this was a manual stack of 14. And the Canon DDP4 is the free software that comes with Canon, and you can focus stack blend in that software. And I think most cameras like Nikon and probably all the other ones have their own software that will give you some features that you don't need to pay extra for. There are a number of features in that particular software by Canon that I rely on. When I'm doing a lot of editing, I usually have that program open for focus points, and there's some proprietary data in the metadata of the images that do not translate onto or into Lightroom. Canon has decided on some things are private, and you can only see those things in their own software. And Canon and Adobe doesn't have access to them, to those particular some features. So I do refer to that, and this was stacked in that software. This is a manual stack of 4, meaning I picked 4 different focus points shot the image and then later processed them together. And this is the one that really got me. This is only recent. This is just this summer. And this is a handheld. I did let the Canon R5 fire away, and I took 50 shots. And again, up in the left corner, 50 taken, 12 used. And this was handheld with at 500 millimeters, and only a 50th of a second. So to me, that's pretty impressive in reference to the image stabilization of the system to end up with this stacked image. And when I saw this, it really opened my mind as to where I was going with this process, because I loved the background and I loved the entire image in focus to the point that I wanted it in focus. And I selected to not use the background images. Same with this one. This one's a little bit different. This was also this summer. 100 shots were taken automatically by the Canon. This one was on a tripod, but I selected only 17. I did not want all those pods in the beginning, in the front, in focus. For this one, I wanted a single plane pretty much in focus. But I added in, you can see the cobwebbing from the spider. I added in certain layers, certain files that I wanted to layer in. So I've selected out 17 out of 100 images. And to me, this was where I wanted to now go with this technique. This was on a tripod again. I think I'll say if it was handheld later, there are a few. And we'll talk about what the increment means, but increment of 1 means very, very close shots, as opposed to an increment of 10 where the shots are further apart. And there's not a definitive number to give you on that. It's a relative scale of 1 to 10. So after seeing those shots of the flowers from this summer, I decided I needed to learn how to do this really well and figure out, does this really work or does it not? And that's where this comes in. I took a series, I set up an experiment out back with the tripod, and these are single shots at varying f-stops, as you can see, from 2.8 to f32 with the 70 at 70 millimeters with the 70 to 200 lens. And this is the same lens, 70 to 200 at 135. And I took this series from f2.8 to f32 as well. And then I studied these images. And I would tell you, when you go through your own images, you can really learn a lot by doing a test like this and really trying to decipher exactly what it means and learn from it and see which do you like better. My goal here was to get the flowers in focus. And we'll see that here. So this is at 70 millimeters. On the left side, this is at 2.8. Focus right there. Great bokeh, but my goal was not to have some minimal focus. I wanted all the flowers in focus. To do that, I had to go to f22. Now I had the whole grouping of the roses in focus, but the background I felt was very bad, very interfering with what I wanted to have. I wanted the flowers in focus. I did not want the entire deck and fence, etc. So I tried it at 135 millimeters, and that's what you see on the left. That's perfectly sharp. This is f2.8, wide open. Great bokeh back here, but that's not what I wanted for this shot. I wanted this. All the flowers in focus, but the background at f32, which is what was required that was the first time that I had this array of flowers in focus, but the background was terrible. So now I tried the focus stack, and you can see on the left, this is the focus stack. This is the single image. The focus stack was done at f2.8, and I used 32 of these to process this. and stack this, and this is what got me all of the flowers in focus. But with the very last shot that I picked on the back edge of this flower, that was shot at f2.8. So the background was only as sharp as f2.8 would allow it to be to the distance of that back flower petal. Compare that to the single shot of f22 that was required at 70 millimeters to bring all these flowers in focus. And this is a major difference in the background. You'll see this white border around here. We'll talk about that border a little later on. That's part of the processing. So I tried it at 135 millimeters and did the same thing. And these are as close as I could get the images. So at this focal length, I needed f32 because I was relatively close to get all the flowers in focus. And you can see the difference in the background. The image on the right is of no value to me as I see it, as opposed to the image on the left. Now, you may not like this particular image having such out of focus background, and yes, you can do that in Photoshop, or you can blur it in Lightroom now. But I'm not addressing those methods. So this is my final image, which I printed. It was in the portfolio book I showed you. I printed it only just for me to see what did it look like in print, and it printed gorgeously by Dan Berg. This was an increment of 2. It is somewhat experimental how close you put those increments. The closer the increment, the more shots it will require to get through the stack. And we'll address that later. In my typical fashion of going way overboard, this was my experiment with these roses. It was 3,150 images, copious notes, a couple calls to Canon, raising some issues with them. I have various increments from 1 to 10 at various focal lengths. And you can see the number of shots that were taken and the shots that were used, and I kind of graded them. So with that knowledge as my background, I was then in very northern Maine in October, and that's where a lot of these images are going to come from in our discussion. When you're doing these kind of images, wind is a problem. It causes ghosting. You may be able to use a high enough ISO and a high enough shutter speed to freeze your action, the movement, so you don't have motion blur. But now the leaves and other structures will not be in the same spot, even though the camera will only take a few seconds to fire off 100 shots. If there's movement, you're going to have work to do in processing. So it doesn't matter if you have a 2500 shutter speed. If there's movement, you're going to have work to get it to work properly. I would suggest, as you're out doing these things, that you take some notes, and we'll talk about that. So you understand and you can study when you get home to figure out what did you just do. Otherwise, there's no learning involved. So this is a single shot, and I took a series of f-stops. In the upper left, you can see it. This is an f3.2, f5.6, and f8. And good shot. I mean, these are potentially usable shots if this was the scene you wanted, but the water droplets aren't perfect. I could have kept on going with the depth of field, but then I would have lost this bokeh. So for a single shot, this is kind of okay. And this is maybe acceptable focus, which is the terminology that might be used. This is the focus stack of that same scene. Again, it may not be your preference, and these are all not perfect artistic images, but I selected them to show the point. So this was 50 shots taken, 22 used. I focused right there. I always look at my focus points when I'm going through my images in Lightroom, and I'll show you how I do that. because I want to know why is it not in focus the way I wanted it to be. So I very, very frequently will go to the focus point. So this is where I focused and I fired through. The water droplet is now in good focus. The background bokeh to me is good. You might want more, and I could have selected the other ones. I have 50, I only use 22, and I cut it short in the process because that's the effect I wanted. This is, I think, shows a really neat thing about this process. I was laying flat on the ground, tripod, and what struck me is this leaf that got caught. I don't pose any of my scenes. And for nature, I don't use removal of stuff. If I messed it up, I messed it up. So this is a 50-shot image. I used 43 in this particular stack, all done at f2.8. I want to control the background. I can put as much background into it as I want. When you're setting these up, the important thing, and I learned this by mistake, by error, by doing it wrong, is not to put the foreground, not to pick something that's really close to you as the start point. You pick the start point and the camera will fire until, on auto, it will fire until it reaches infinity. As long as you've allowed it enough shots, you set it for 200, say, and you can focus from right in front of your face all the way back, and it will do that. I was picking, I want to focus right there, and then when I got home, I'd say, well, this is out of focus down here and the shot's ruined. So I learned that pretty quickly, to waste shots in the front. So this particular image of 43, I really love. This is that same sequence, the same 50, but I used 30 when I stacked this, again, f2.8. So I'll go back and forth. Look over here. So I thought I'd like this one until I did this one. And I like the sticks here. So I could go all the way back if I wanted to. And now you can see how these are in a comparison. On the left are 42 of the shots were used, and on the right, 30 of the shots were used. And that's part of the creativeness of what you really were looking for. You don't have to do focus stacking with selective background capture with the autofocus, with the camera on auto. This is manual, as you might do for a big landscape with a foreground and a background that are 100 feet apart. So this is a manual stack of 3 with different focus points. So on this one, the focus is here, and let me take this opportunity to show you how I know where the focus is. You certainly can't remember it when you've taken thousands of pictures. So in Lightroom, I have an app, a plugin app called Show Focus Points. Give it a minute. So it's going to, here's the key on the side here. It's going to show me that this is exactly where my R5 was focused with back button focusing on this image. This is the next image. That's the middle of the 3. And this is the third image. And that's the third focus point.
Vince, can I ask a question quick?
Absolutely.
Is that unique to the Canon, or is that
No.
universal?
It's limited to certain brands. I know Canon and Nikon. I'm not sure about the others.
Okay, thanks.
And it's free. I think this image, this is the third in the stack, will show you what you get. And this was done at 2.8. How out of focus the foreground is. That's not a real far, maybe it's a foot. I could tell on the camera, sorry, in the metadata, how far I am. Subject is 1.34 meters from my focus point. So to the front is probably about a foot. Now here is the manual stack done in Photoshop of four, I'm sorry. So that's the manual stack of the ones you just saw, 3 images. Very simple to do in Photoshop. This is a manual stack of 4 images. Different focus points. A simple image, you might not think you need to do multiple focus points, but if you want from here to be print sharp, not just acceptably sharp, but when Dan Berg prints it, you're going to need to go to f16, f22. You'll get some diffraction of your lens, lessening the sharpness, and your bokeh will not look anything like this bokeh. So here's where wind can run into an issue for you. This is a manual stack of 3. There's some ghosting. Sorry for 1 second. There's some ghosting in this image over here, over in here, right there. This is, you can see it pretty well there, and right in here. The leaf has moved. And between shots, even though I fired them pretty quickly, these are my 3 shots. This was focused on the bottom area, the middle area, and then the top area to get that focus. They were put together in Photoshop, and it's not usable this way. This requires some fixing. So I want to show you about this ghosting issue, and this shows it really clearly. I took 80 images of this leaf. I used 9 of them for this stack because that got me the depth that I wanted. 1/100th of a second, the wind was not blowing much. I didn't think. It was a gentle breeze. It was raining. That's the water drop. So I used 9 shots. I focused right in there and stacked these 9 shots in Photoshop. And that's what you get. Now that can be fixed in Photoshop, but if you're starting to do this, doing stable subjects would be easier. Or going to another program, which I'll show you in the second half, Helicon Focus. If anyone out there is using Helicon Focus, could you just speak up and say you are? Helicon Focus is a paid app, currently costing about $45. Around there. $45, believe it or not, for a 1-year subscription. You can buy it outright for about 200 something. It is the primary professional app for focus stacking that's used internationally. And interestingly, it's still coming from the Ukraine, as is Clean My Mac, which is an app I use to clean my computer. And their customer service is still good. They're 150 miles northeast of Kiev. Their offices, and I just got an email from them yesterday. So this is a Helicon Focus, and it can get some movement blur. It does a good job fixing it, but to manually fix it, as we'll see, is drastically easier than Photoshop. So this is nine images. Sometimes it doesn't work. This is a single shot that I like a lot more than the next one I'm going to show you. I was interested in here. In the upper left corner, you can see the details. It's an f2.8 shot. So I wanted to focus stack and get a little bit more. And this was my focus stack of 50. Used 6, but I missed the focus, and I didn't know I missed it. And I didn't have this, none of my images have this foreground in focus. This picture is ruined for me with these out of focus. And so this is a throwaway. And I have several series that I did of this because it was not an easy thing to compose. And none of them are good. I'll have a lot more pixels after I delete them. So the single image won on this for me, but I was quite disappointed because I worked hard on this one and it didn't work because of missing setting my near focus. Again, any questions, just interrupt me, please. So on this series, I focused right there, bottom right-hand corner. I know that because I went back and used the app that I showed you. And there's also the Canon app down here, the Digital Photo Professional 4, that will show it to me. I'll show you that on another image. So in this, for this image, as you see it, I shot 70 images, used 14, and the exposure is 0.4 seconds, as you see up in the upper left. Composited them together. The composite went perfect in Photoshop. It gave me all of these trails, which are not in the single image. And I would recommend, whenever you're doing focus stack, to take a single image as well for your knowledge later to learn from it, and also as insurance when you mess up your focus stack. So I could have cut this wherever I wanted to focus. I wanted this to go back to there. I could have stopped it here because I'm selecting of the 70 what I'm using. This one I used 9 to put this image together. EV is the amount of light. I've undercut the meter by 1 stop. That's what EV -1 would mean. Focus point was right there. Sorry, right there. And I stacked these together in Photoshop. It worked quite well. Stable subject, and the water movement was fine. Yes.
I just love the way the bubbles and everything are in the front, that you would never have gotten that if you didn't do the stacking.
Right.
Yeah, it's really pretty.
This was a 1/13 of a second exposure, and they would be gone if you had done a whole bunch of really long exposures. Thanks, Jane. Now this one's really pretty interesting, and it relates to another mistake of not going far enough in the foreground, but I love this shot. Again, the background may not be what you want. It's what I was purposely looking for creatively. 100 taken, 20 used, f2.8. On this particular trip in October, I spent 5 days near the end of the Appalachian Trail and shot about 4,500 images. Many of them were like this. They were tight telephoto shots. As opposed to big landscapes. I was trying to purposely go after this type of image. And I'm really happy with this image. This is sharp on my computer all the way back here. And that's where I ended the stack. I could have kept on going back. This is the same shot. There's a peak of wood that comes out here. And this is the peak. And I'm focused back here now, right there and right here. But it continues back further beyond that. So in the process, if you don't let the camera decide, you decide how far back you want the image to be captured, if you've done the settings properly.
Did you have Dan print that, the not this one, the showing that one? Did you have that printed?
No, none of these are printed yet, but they're due to be printed. But I want to just see something here. Yeah, here where am I? Okay. So I elected to not put in, I had intended in the field, there's a piece of wood that comes out here. See if I can show it to you. There it goes. And I wanted this to go out further, but this is not in focus.
Vince, how do you get your initial focus point when there's nothing to focus on? Do you set it manually at a guessed distance, or What?
No, I decide now with more intelligence that what's the closest thing I want in focus, and say it's this red spot. So I will back button focus or manually focus or just focus as you normally would right there. So now you've told the camera you're going to do this series of focus bracketing, as Canon calls it. Focus stacking is the process that you do in Photoshop or Helicon Focus. Focus bracketing, you've told Canon, start my focus point here and keep on firing until you hit infinity. Does that make sense, Lee? Lee, did you hear that?
Sorry, I muted so I didn't interrupt. Well, it sounds simple, but when there's nothing in front of the thing that you want to focus on, how do you focus on it? I'm not making much sense. You want
Okay,
to,
so let's take this shot. Let me open up the crop again. So I'm looking at this whole scene here.
yeah,
And I'm saying, I have my tripod, everything, sorry about that, for those who don't like tripods. But I've decided in the field, I want this to be, I don't need anything closer than this in focus because I'm going to crop it around here. I really wanted this notch. And I messed up. So in order to get that notch, I need to either focus here, but I don't want distractive out of focus in the foreground. So I will pick this as my focus point. And now this part is further back. So I'm going to catch that. But I need to tell it what is in front. Where are the leaves that are in the front, the foreground that I need in focus, so I don't end up with distracting image parts of the image. And I think I have that on the next one. I can show you maybe better.
So
Yeah,
even
look,
if you
it's just-
pick something that's too close, that won't matter because you won't have to use it.
Won't
But
matter.
yeah, so
And it's better to have it than to not
Right.
have it, which happened to me repetitively.
pick the
in the
thing
past.
pick the thing that's as close to you as you can find to focus on to start it and then go from there.
Correct.
except that when I was photographing wildflowers, there's nothing between me and the wildflower. There isn't anything else that I can focus on because the first thing that is in the first image is, or the first structure is the flower. There's nothing
Well, that's
at
what
the
you
side
focus
that I can
on.
say, well, I'll focus on this, and then that's the starting point. And, 3 or 4 images in, I'll have the flower.
Yes, and so you've done it right. You focus on the very foreground, the very front leaf area, petal area. And I'll see if I can show that to you in this image, maybe.
Okay.
Let's see here.
So Vince,
Yeah,
even though you're manually focusing where you want to start, once you program your Canon, it keeps firing into different focal points without you having to do anything focus-wise other than do the starting point.
exactly.
Okay.
So that's when you have it on automatic focus bracketing feature, as
Right.
opposed to doing it manually. So when you go to focus bracketing, you tell it to put this right here in focus, that spot, and don't stop until it goes to infinity. And one of these will show you there. That's part of the sequence. From that image.
But you didn't use that one. You didn't use that one that you just showed us.
No.
That you
No,
didn't want
this
that
is-
stuff in focus.
No. I believe, let's see, yeah, so this is a single, I'm out of sequence here. Hold on one second. Something just glitched for me. Oh, I'm in the develop module. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah, here we go. Now I'm back where I want it. So let's look at this image. So this is a single shot at f2.8 and see if we can answer these questions. And I want again to show you the difference between this shot focused up front, single shot. This is some of the birch trees in the background. This is a focus stack. Let me go back. Single shot, f2.8, almost no depth of field. And I'll show you that in the second half of this talk, what that means, almost no depth of field. This is the focus stack of 16 images at the same f2.8. 97 were taken, including that one. So as much of and as long as you tell the camera to take enough shots, then you'll get infinity. If your settings are such that you've told it to only take 50 shots and it has only gotten 10 feet and stops, infinity won't be there. And one of the secrets is you should always have extra shots on both ends. So if you've taken 50 and used 50, it's likely that you could have done better if you had more shots. So it's key to take a look at the back of your camera when you're done to make sure that that last shot has gotten far enough back that you want, because I may have wanted that white tree in focus and it's not perfect. And also make sure that you got the foreground focused properly.
Vince, Rickshay.
Yeah.
To address Lee's concern, couldn't you
Yeah.
simply initially focus on the nearest element and then back off? Since you're doing it manually, just back off slightly on your lens to ensure absolutely, since there's nothing else to focus on but that initial element, couldn't you just back off then and then take your series to ensure that you got
You
that
can.
initial shot?
You can, but if I was setting this up and I had a single flower, and what I wanted in focus was right there, then I would merely go to my focus and set my focus right there. Or if in Lee's case, right at the very, very edge. But yeah, you can then defocus a little bit manually if you want to.
Right.
The
That would
problem,
work.
the
Dick.
problem is, isn't it, is if you do focus manual and then change to auto, the camera will immediately switch to whatever it thinks is the focal point.
I didn't follow that.
If you're on manual and then you change to auto, won't the camera immediately focus?
Yes.
Yeah.
This has to be done in auto mode on the Canon.
Yeah.
But
The
you
only
can
thing I
adjust,
can-
you can
Go on.
set your autofocus in the autofocus mode. You can tweak the autofocus manually. It's actually, you can turn that off or turn it on, Lee. So you can allow the autofocus to have a manual override or not. So to do what was just suggested, you would have to allow the camera to manually adjust an autofocus point. And then you can fire away and that would work fine.
Okay.
Hi, this
Vince?
is Mike Rumler. I'm sitting in. I'm new. One of the things I've done is you can actually just hold something in front of that, like as you're talking about for a flower, Lee. If the petal you want to get in front of that, you can just simply focus on hold something in front of that, focus on that even closer to the camera, then remove that, and then continue, and then fire away.
Yeah, I was wondering if that might be a solution.
That would be in some cases. I was laying on the ground here. And it's hard enough for me to get up after 2 knees replaced. I get up on all fours and no one wants to watch that happen.
All right.
So that would be hard to do on something like this. I would just pick the closest one I think we didn't do this one. So this one, we'll continue with that thought, Lee. So single shot f2.8. This is a focus. This is an f-stop series. I've done I love doing these to study them. So 2.8, 5.0, and now the focus stack. Once I got to 5.0, the background was no good, so I stopped. But I do f-stop series often as a learning tool for me. And this is the f2.8. I think you get the point. I just love the control. This is 15 used out of 46, and I could have gotten those berries. But then I didn't need a focus. I still would need a focus stack to do that, but that wouldn't be the look I was going after.
Vince, are
Yes.
you using your auto assist beam with this technique?
Yes, I use that for everything. I get the infrared light or the beam light is always turned on for my camera.
Okay.
So yeah,
And then I'm actually looking at the manual for my Canon, and it gives a whole series of the different lenses that are useful, and then which ones, where's that list?
Yeah.
Disable exposure smoothing or enable it, depending on the lens. Huh, interesting.
there are there are some lenses that do not, older lenses, all of the older lenses do not work on the Canon R5 in focus stacking mode. I have the
Thank you.
RF lenses, the new lenses, and they do. But
Thank you.
the 10-year-old lens may not. So Lee, that maybe this one would help. If I was focus stacking this image, I would probably pick right there to start my focus on. It's the closest thing to my lens in this field of view that I'm going to want in focus. But this is a single shot at f8. I kind of threw it in here because I think it's really cool. I was hoping someone could tell me what this is. But then it relates to the next series.
That's
So
gorgeous.
this is say again?
I just think that's gorgeous. Go back to that other one. I love that.
I
would like to know what that little thing is though.
I have 3 of these different ones that I'm going to do as a triptych, I think. And I don't know what the whole thing is. It's some kind of ferny lichen. It was on a tree, and there it is. And there's all kinds of weirdo stuff in here, some of which you don't see when you're shooting, like this thing here. I love the texture I got in the focus stack here. And I have this as a single shot that I just can't accomplish this kind of detail with single shots. So this is a stack of 30. It's relatively flat, and one would think what do you need focus stacking for? You're relatively flat because it's going back to the tree. But I could not get this detail in any of my single shots.
How far away were you? It looks like you're 153 millimeters. So how far away from this were you lying or standing or?
780 millimeters. This one I was sitting on a log, but a dead log with my tripod in front of me.
Mhm.
So I have had wanted to bring this up anyway. I have my metadata in Lightroom customized, and right here you can customize it.
Mhm.
So it shows whatever you want it to show. Make note of this audio file. I'll show you that later. This is so cool. I'm quite upset that I never used it until just thinking about it. But I have here the exposure bias. This is not the default. The default doesn't show exposure bias. I had to keep looking at the Canon software to figure out whether I was -1 or -3. And when I go through my images, I study that in detail. Here's the focus distance. That was a customized thing. The user comment, I use that all the time. One of the things I will always put in there is if I've done generative fill, that I put it there because now I know I can't use that for anything other than me. and I'll put other notes in, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my customized panel. Remind me about the audio file. So this is the focus stack, 13 images, static, very simple to do in Photoshop, take it 10 minutes. This was a Helicon Focus Pro. They have 3 models of the apps, and this is the middle model. I think the next model is a purchase of the whole software. So in this one, my focus point was in the foreground right here, because Lee, I wanted this in focus. When I took it initially, I focused back here and I looked on the camera and I said, oh, doggone it, the foreground's not in focus. So I set my focus point right about there. 30 shots taken going way back to that tree. I used 9 and I got, this did not work in Photoshop because of the wind moving the leaves. I could have fixed it, but Helicon makes it a piece of cake to fix. And Helicon has 3 methods of 3 algorithms, this an A, a B, and a C method. This was method C. And I typically use all 3 because I don't have enough experience to predict which is the best one. And this one I think is really cool, and I'm hoping someone can tell me what these are. The 100 stack went back to here. I used 46 for this Helicon Focus. For some reason, this did not go well with Photoshop. It was all ghosted, and there was no movement. These were static, stiff things. And I don't know what they are. Anybody know?
They're organic golf tees.
Yes, that's exactly what I said to my friend, the golfer. I said, they're golf tees. They're made in nature. So another focus stack. Maybe not so necessary here, but I got this sharp with this trail, but not, this is out of focus on purpose. You just can't do that otherwise. And this is what was in the newsletter. So this particular one, I took 46 shots, 25 were used. Of here, this was almost in some areas 1 foot deep moss. And I was laying down, I was in this moss for about an hour plus. It was just unbelievable. And when I got up, I was in various areas. When you would get up, it was like you weren't there. It just sprung back up again. And it's a moss forest area. It's just phenomenal. And this is white growth, white fern of some sort, lichen. I don't know what it is. But I found it so cool, and this cliff effect. And this is what I visualized. This is a focus stack of 25 at f2.8. In order for me to get and I did a series, in order for me to get from the front to the back in focus, I needed f22 because I was so close. I can't show you the distance on this. So this is a screenshot. But I was within a foot and a half maybe of the foreground. So I needed f22, and the background was just, that's trash. That's of no value to me for anything. Again, you may not like this. You might want more than I put in. I don't think you'd want this. You lose the whole edge. This looks like a cliff, and who knows what the scale of this is. So there is the image. It's 25 images stacked, f2.8 at 111 millimeters, about a foot and a half away from the foreground. Picking Lee right about there, but ideally further front. And then I didn't use the ones that were a little too out of focus in the foreground. I do my crop when I'm looking at my images and say, okay, I want to crop it here. And now I go and I find the images that are sharp to that crop. And sometimes I don't have to do it manually. I can just kind of see it. Other times I'll actually go through the focus. And this is the single image. So that one versus that one. This one wins no prize. And I wouldn't print this one. This one I should print. And we can take a break. That was, we're at 7:57. We started about 10 after, I think. And I was going to, if you want to take a break, we can stand or not. Or I can keep going. I was going to get into more of the technical aspects now.
Vince,
Yes, Bob.
for us that don't have focus bracketing on our cameras,
Yes.
does anybody else do focus stacking without the internal focus bracketing? Just
Well, yeah,
curious.
you can do that easily. Put it on, I mentioned that in the very beginning. The first image I showed you of that stacking, that was manual.
So you're just leaning into it with your.
Yes, you put the
Okay.
camera on high speed, continuous. Pick the point that you want in focus. So I chose these blue things.
Right.
And now don't change your focus. Now you go manual focus. You pick this blue one right there. You hold it, and now you go zzz, and move forward, and you're done.
Okay.
No tripod.
Oh, without the tripod, yeah.
And I can tell you, it will be more difficult in most instances without a tripod, but handheld at 500, Bob. Now that the camera did the autofocus stacking on that, but that was no tripod, handheld, 1/50th of a second at 500 millimeters.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a focusing rail too that sort of works. So you might try that too.
Yeah, that's really cumbersome.
Yes, it
I
is.
have one too, and I've used it 3 times, I think, in 30 years. But if you take enough shots and move slowly enough through it, you don't need the auto bit.
Yeah,
I've
and I guess the Helicon Focus would be the best software to use for those kind.
If there's movement,
Yeah.
typically if there's no movement, then the Photoshop works fine, and you'll see that now. Shall I
Okay.
progress, Jay?
Vince,
Yes.
as part of your presentation, are you going to show us how you pull all these various images into Photoshop,
Yeah,
stack
we're going to
them?
do that right now, Joel.
Oh, okay.
So just to recap, was that another question back there?
It's Angel, can you hear me?
Yeah, Angel.
Going back to the golf tee looking mushroom,
Yes. Mhm.
I typed it in there. What it is, I use Google Lens and just copied it off my screen. Yep,
What is it?
it's I typed
Is
in
it a mushroom?
Yeah, it is a Cladonia. Um,
Can you
yeah,
text it to me?
yep, I texted.
Then we can
I'll
all
text
see it. Text it to everybody.
Oh,
I
I texted.
Googled it, it said Pixie Cup lichen. There's apparently
Dixie cup lichen.
Correct.
there's a ton of varieties of it in the Northern Hemisphere, but
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. So it's not a mushroom then, I guess.
It is a mushroom. I
It
believe
is a
so.
mushroom.
Yep.
In the chat. Got it. Oh, Jay has the book in the chat. Discuss my use of extension tubes. I'll be right back.
Also, the question that I had for Vince was if anyone knows, was he using an ND filter when he took pictures of the water? Because
Okay, so extension tubes are non-optical, and they create space between the end of your lens where it fits into the camera and the camera body. So can you all see that? Let me change my view here to me. Yeah, here you go. So they come in various thicknesses. I have two. This one is 10 millimeters. And this one is 16. I did not buy the thicker one. No glass. And you can stack these. You could use one or two. This is both together. And this is the brand Kenko. They sell them specific for each camera, so that the electronics are read by the camera. You maintain autofocus, etc. And when you move the lens away from the camera body, it's like having a bellows, the old-time bellows of a big camera. It magnifies the further you move the lens away from the camera body. And the images of that passion fruit from San Francisco at the beginning were done with extension tubes. Lee has some notes there on that you might want to look at later. Show focus point works for Canon. Oh, so that free app for focus points, Debbie says it works for Canon, Nikon, and some Sonys. And I got the Angel note. So thank you.
Doesn't the extension tube really work by just allowing you the lens to focus closer, but not really magnify, just to focus closer than it would without it?
Yeah, that's correct. That's a common question I get all the time. It doesn't magnify. It allows you to get closer with that 70 to 200 lens.
Yeah, it'll focus closer, much closer with it than without
Right.
it, but it doesn't really
Right.
magnify.
Right, but the effect is you get magnification.
Right. You can get closer, and your object will be bigger on your film or your sensor. Yep.
Right. And that's those two. I think they were probably about $40 a piece. I guess truly magnifying would be if you screwed on an adapter on the front of your lens, a magnifying adapter.
Correct. Yep.
So
it doesn't really change. It doesn't really change your glass. That's what's nice about them. You're not adding another piece of glass.
right. There is nothing good that's really said about adding magnifying glass on the front of your lens. And this saves you from buying a macro lens. But there are some advantages to that as well. So the goal of what I've talked about tonight is a controlled selective depth of field, both foreground and background, obtaining images that you can't obtain otherwise, except by doing some type of focus bracketing and stacking. And this, I had made reference to this earlier. I think it's always good to know how shallow the depth of field can be. This is from the app Photo Pills. So if you set it for my Canon camera, 70 millimeters, f2.8, subject is 3 feet away, 1 meter. The depth of field is 1 inch with the subject somewhere in the 1/3 of the way back from the front, approximately. But that's all your depth of field is. If it's a 135 millimeter lens at the same 3 feet, depth of field is 1/4 of an inch. So that explains, and you can do this for every f-stop and measurement and zoom. It explains why you think you should be in focus and you're not, and why acceptably sharp, which is the definition of depth of field for a print, doesn't always work because it's not always acceptably sharp, particularly if you crop. If you're at 15 feet with a 70 millimeter lens at f2.8, the depth of field is 2 feet. Your subject's at 15, that gives you a fair amount of distance. And this tells you in front of and behind that's not in focus. 13 to 16 feet is in focus. And at 135 at 15 feet, 7 feet's in focus, but half of it's not in focus. So just bear that in mind. You can look that up on Photo Pills. So this is specific to the Canon R5. All the programs are going to be different, but the thought process is the same. So this is the red menu on the back of the Canon R5. When you hit that and go to screen 5, you'll see focus bracketing default disabled. You click the set button for disabled and you get this screen. And now you move it to enable. That's what you have to tell it to do. You have to be active here. And then you hit the set button and now it's enabled. And now you get to this screen automatically, one screen to the next. And now focus bracketing, which is the picture taking, focus stacking is the post-processing. It's enabled. You set the number of shots. On the Canon, you can go from 2 shots to 999. Typically, I've been doing 100. Sometimes I've gone to 200. The increment is the relative scale of how close together each shot is. There is no number that you can get from Canon. That's why I was speaking to them. I really wanted more science from them, and it's proprietary and they won't tell you. I'm sure their engineers know, but the difference between 1 and 5 in the focus increment is how far the internal lens is going to be changed in the process. And the distance depends on the f-stop that you've chosen. So it will be different for f2.8 versus f8 versus f11. For what I'm doing, everything is at f2.8 or 3.5, something in that ballpark, because I don't want the background in focus. When you're wide open that way, it's a very narrow slit. That's why I showed you that page of very tight depth of field, 1/4 inch. That's why I tend to shoot at 2. f2.8 increment of 2 at 100. If it's something that's a relatively bigger scene, I might go to 4. If it's a landscape, I might go to 8. But generally for these close-up things, it's around 2 seems to work. I don't use disable exposure smoothing, which means the scene could have varying exposure through it. And with exposure smoothing, the camera will change the exposure with every shot to balance it. And I don't want that. I want to be able to do that in post. I want to be able to control the depth, the shadows and brightness, etc. I don't want my exposure changing. So to recap that on this slide, and this will be in the recording, obviously, or take a phone shot of it. Enable the red menu for focus bracketing. Tend not to go below 50. Try your different increments until you learn how to do it. You can do your own experiment. You just don't have to do my 3100 exposures to learn it. I tend to do 2 to 4 and 100. I don't do this. The process on the R5 takes anywhere from 2 seconds to 5 seconds. So it's not as if the sun's changing, and I want light and dark shadows there. I use a cable release, or you can do a delay. You don't want to be hitting the shutter button. I do back button focusing. Try to always do a single shot in your series, so you know what to do, what you've got. Now the question is, you've shot 100 shots at this one, and then you move and you take another 100 shots. What is what? You can turn off the feature and then take a shot of your hand, which I was doing until that got to be crazy, because I'm laying down in the moss and now I have to return it back on again. And I tended to just let it rip, and then I figured it out in post. But you could use the audio of your camera, at least on the R5, and take 30-second memos. So you've completed your clip of 125 images. You push the record button for 2 seconds and it will come up, record memo. And now you will say end of stack. And here's the important part, increment 2. Because afterwards, even the Canon software doesn't tell you the increment. And if you're learning and trying to figure it out why it worked and didn't, you have to know the increment. And you're not going to write it down on a piece of paper. I've tried that for 30 years and I never do it.
Can you access that audio then from Lightroom?
Yes, you can. I'll show it to you. It's
Okay, because
fabulous.
I tried to do that on my Olympus and then I don't know how to access the audio.
Yeah. So again, Bob, it can all be done manually. So just to recap, there's the menu for Canon. Maybe 2 and 100 to start with. I have this shot here. I follow Oliver Wright. I had him speak in 2023. He's in the UK and in the Arctic, and he does handheld macro. He's a Canon, whatever. He teaches for Canon in Europe, and he takes bugs. His Instagram images are spectacular. It's all handheld. He does use the camera's rapid fire auto process, but it's handheld. You find the near image, and then figure it out in Lightroom or whatever you're using. You can decide on your background bokeh and what you want. If you're doing a big landscape, f8 probably will work well. That's maybe the sharpest point of your lens, maybe 2 or so f-stops from wide open. And if it's windy out, fast shutter speed and high ISO don't help you because it's movement between the images. So here's the process. We'll do it this way, and then I'm going to show it to you. And you can take a phone shot of this. You open up Lightroom, you pick the file, you pick the files you want, first and last. And now you have your series, like that Dixie Cup lichen. No, that was the one after that. One of the end shots or that white fern with the cliff behind it. That was only 3 inches tall. You pick the range, you right click in Lightroom, which gives you the contextual menu of edit in, and you pick open as layers in Photoshop. Once you get to Photoshop, you pick all the layers. You go up to edit, auto align, and I'll show you this. And then again, edit, auto blend, flatten the layer, and then save it. So take a screenshot of that because you're going to want to refer to that. So here's, I think this is the shot that Jenny liked, I'm not sure. So 30 shots were taken. I used 13. I'm in Lightroom. When first thing I do is go through my series and I color code them in sequence. There's like 5 different colors you can use, and I just go one to the other. You can see down here, there's the next one coming up is purple, and there's some non-series shots in between. So here I go through that and my whole trip, and I just figured out where all the focus stacks were, color coded them, and then went back and decided which ones I liked, and then would go through the images and pick the ones I want to use, the 13. And my protocol, the way I do it, is I white flag it. So that tells me, as I'm going through these, marching through, this is the one I want. I'll white flag that one, keep going through. I don't want that one. I back up and white flag that. And that's my sequence. Right click on within the sequence. So I would right click right there within the picture. It brings up this menu. Choose edit in, not Photoshop, open as layers. It has to be layers in Photoshop. And here it is. The scene this is what you would see in Photoshop. And these are gray because I have highlighted them all. You click one, click on a Mac at least, you then hit Shift and click the other one, and that captures them all, and it makes them a little more gray as opposed to this dark gray. It changes them. So these have all been highlighted and selected. In Photoshop, you go up to Edit, and along the top menu bar, Auto Align Layers. So there's a little bit of movement even with the tripod, and it's still subject. There's movement with the focusing change. That's called focus breathing. And now Photoshop will line up the pixels, pixel by pixel. And the recommended way for this is hit auto and do not turn these on. You don't want it to be manipulating if there's a shadow that it reads as a vignette, and you don't want to get rid of distortion without you controlling that distortion. So for focus stacking, you want auto align, the projection type is auto, and you hit OK. It'll go through that, and depending on how many you have, if there's 3, it might take you a minute. If there's 100, it could take you 15 minutes as you watch football. Now it gets done, and you come back and go edit, auto blend. Now you've told Photoshop, meld these things together. And we'll go through this again in another sequence in more detail. In the auto blend, you have 2 choices. You can use this for doing panos or stack images. And this one you do want checked. You might want to take a phone shot of that. Seamless tones should be checked. And I don't want it to do content aware fill of any of my areas. And you hit OK. That process will take another 5 to 15 minutes, depending on how many you got. Usually it's about 5. And when you're all done, you'll have all these images that I'm going to show you in a moment, all these layers, which take up a lot of hardware room. So you flatten that image, which gives you 1 layer, and that's it. This is now the finished Photoshop single layer flattened image. And trust me, if you've never used Photoshop and you have Lightroom, you're paying for Photoshop, you follow these slides and it'll take you no time and you'll be a master. And now you hit save, file, save, and now it goes back to Lightroom, and here it is. It's my stacked image. As soon as it comes in, I can see from Photoshop, it's coming back as a TIFF. I'll star it so I don't lose it in the mess of all my images. And I actually typically 5-star it because I don't use 5 stars except for extremely rare images. So that allows me to find it really quickly. I may have already given 1 star to 20 images. So that's the end result that we saw before that I think, oh no, it was the other one that Jenny liked, the single image.
No, I like this one.
Do you?
Mhm.
So here's another one. Say again, Jenny, I'm sorry.
I like your final stacked one. I think that this was the one that I liked. Oh, that
Okay.
other one, that was the other type of, yeah, there were 2 different ones I liked.
Yeah, the other one had all the curls on it.
Yeah, I like this too, though.
Angel, tell me what this little guy is and this little guy. So here's another one. I think we'll go in more detail now. I took this stack of 30 or series. I chose 9.
These guys really into this stuff.
So I chose 9 and I flagged them as I went through them. Right click, edit in Photoshop layers. You would click right there. These are those highlighted layers. There are 9 layers here. Auto align the layers. Do auto as the projection. Blend the layers using stack. And now I want to show you this part. So in Lightroom, I didn't show you this on the first series. Lightroom has now created, I brought these into Lightroom as layers. Lightroom picks what it feels are the focus points.
Do you mean
Sorry, the
Photoshop
pixels-
or Lightroom?
I'm sorry, thank you. Photoshop picks the pixels that are in the sharp focus for each layer. So, and it creates these masks of the parts of the image of each layer that it's choosing for the final composite. And if you don't like what it's done at the end, you have to go back and you can work on each one of these individual masks, but that's not easy. So this is what's happening. So here's that same stack in Photoshop. This is the near image, 8392. This is the far image, 8400. I have only the first image turned on. That's the eyeball. This is what Photoshop said. These are the pixels that are usable. This is the very last image. And Photoshop said, here's the mask. And I blew the mask up by just clicking on it. this is what it Photoshop selected on this mask. And this is, I have now 5 of them turned on, the first 5, to show you what is being picked. And it has done that automatically. And this is now the final image with all the layers turned on for all these masks, and it gives me this. But look at that right here. That's ghosting because the leaf moved. And when you do all that work and then you see that, you say, oh, geez. Now you have to go through these and find the one that you want and mask it in and mask another one out. I'm going to hit flatten. It gives me one background layer with this image. Send it to Photoshop. I'm sorry, to Lightroom. And here it is in Lightroom, and I start it. But this is the final image, and it's no good. It has a fair amount of ghosting in it. And it occasionally this will happen. You get these aberrations of color. And it's probably things of different colors that we're moving. It's not Photoshop's fault. It's your subject's fault by moving.
Vince,
So
just
that's where
one,
Helicon comes into play.
Vince, just one thing. You flatten your image to save hard drive space, correct?
Yes, of course, these are,
Right.
I'm using 50 images or 100
Right.
layers, like some of the ones I've done. It's too much to save, and you can unflatten it as long as you didn't close Photoshop out.
Right.
When you see that it's ghosted and you screwed up.
Yeah, you don't have to flatten it. That's what I'm saying.
Sorry, yes, you are correct. And you might not do that if there's only 3 of them. And I actually don't flatten it any longer, I learned, until after I go to Lightroom and then make sure I'm okay. Then I go back and I flatten it.
Right. Okay.
Hey Vince, when you're going through those layers, it's Angel again.
Yes, Angel.
Could you print each of those layers as a separate print?
Absolutely.
I wonder what that would be like on a transparent sheet of paper and then
It
just
would look
stack
like
them
that.
to hang them. Yeah. So if
Yeah,
you
you
print
can
it
do the
like,
whole series. You can do all 9 of them. And you can get this empty space where there's the background where there's nothing there. Yes, you can do that, Angel.
Vince,
Yes, sure.
instead of flattening the image, you can merge the visible if you have the top layer active, and that gives you a sort of a pseudo flattened image. And if you turned off all the other layers beneath it, you could export that image and make sure that's what you want before you flatten it.
But it's using all the layers.
Well, yes, it's merging the visible, but you
Oh,
can
I
then
get you. I get you.
save that merged visible layer by turning off all the underlying layers, and that
Gotcha.
gives you a merged visible image to see if you don't want to flatten it at that point.
Right, right. But then you still have to go back, theoretically, if you have 100 images and flatten it.
You probably in the end want to flatten it. Yeah.
Yes. So let me just, since no one said yes to Helicon, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I would like to show it to you. And we're almost done the focus stacking talk. So you get into Helicon differently. You go export. And sorry, there are several apps that are different where you don't just right click and go to it. Topaz Photo AI, for one, you have to go after in a different fashion. This one you have to go after in a different fashion. You export it, and if you have Helicon on your computer, it will show you 2 choices, either as a DNG or a TIFF. And one of the big advantages of Helicon is it's a DNG is a digital negative Adobe extension. It's basically the same as a raw file. So your raw file from Lightroom goes into Helicon, and you set it up so that it comes back as another raw file. So that means that when you now need to do masking or you want to do noise reduction, You can do all of that perfectly fine as on a raw file back in Lightroom. So there's a big advantage in working with raw in, raw out on Helicon. So I exported the same files that you just saw with Helicon from that went into Photoshop. They're now exported as DNGs or RAWs in Helicon Focus, and this is what you see for Helicon. Same layers. This is very, very fast, 10 seconds to load images. And now you hit render, you tell it to, okay, start working on those images, put them together, and it will run through each one of these. And you'll have the final image on this side and the source from this side. So this is highlighted up here. This image is 8400, and that's this one. I could click this one and this will change. Sorry. And it's set for method C. And now I need to retouch. So it got the same kind of ghosting here that Photoshop got. It didn't get the color aberration that Photoshop got. And now this is really cool. You retouch by clicking up here and you decide what you need to fix. It will tell you the file it's coming from. It's saying 8394. Right now, this was set for 8400. And you have a speed key, F9, and you'll change to that file. And over here is the source. So right now, it would be taking it from the wrong source. But now I've brought it either manually down to what it's telling me I should be using, or I've clicked F9 on my keyboard. And now it's the proper source to get that in focus. And I'll slide up and down here. I'm taking from here, that's the area, and you can make this as big as you want, this brush, and it's going this way to here. Here comes the arrow to there. And it's basically cloning pixels from here to there. And as you do that, you find all the places that are a problem, and you put it to the image it should be on and just rub it, and it will be fixed like magic. As it's going through the process, it shows you its layers, that masking layer similar to Photoshop in a different fashion. So this file 8394, it's used the bright areas that you can see to establish this image. And so, and it does the same, it does that for each one. You can show each one of those in the source map feature. And here's the comparison between Photoshop and Helicon. Much easier to work with when you have corrections to make. But again, it's another thing to pay for. And I'm going to break in a second. I want to show you the focus breathing, if I can. No, I can't. That white stuff that you saw on a couple images, like I said, I would address later. Here are some. Even on the tripod, the camera's not moving, but the physics of the lens moves. And as you focus in and out, near and far, the crop changes. So you can have Photoshop automatically fill this in with generative fill. You can fill again later with generative fill manually, or you can crop it out, which is how I do it. So that's focus breathing. That's not because you've messed up. Questions on focus stacking? If anyone is interested, I do have a short recording we can play it another time later, maybe on the actual corrections in Helicon, this process right here of doing the circles.
Did you
But it's very smooth. Then it saves back into Lightroom. And that was it. So it's 8:30. I'm
Did you
fine
show us
to-
how you got that audio clip.
Oh, okay. Yes. And I have other stuff, as you can see here, to show you if you want the audio clip. Well, let me just go into my catalog. So when you put it on your SD card, it stays as a sidecar file, just like your metadata does. So that was my test image for tonight. And if you use the customized feature, right there is audio file wave. It's a wave file. And if you click that, this is a test of the recording system. Test 1, 2. So I would audio increment 3. And unfortunately, in Lightroom, the only place you can see it is under the metadata. If you customize it and you open that up and you pick what you want from the customization panel. And now I would know at the end of every stack, I'm going to have an audio file. And there it is. You under the grid view, when you're looking at multiple images, there is no icon to show you which one of these of these 4,757 images has an audio file.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Vin-
However,
Vince, can you filter it in the metadata?
no,
Okay.
cannot. However, there is a free app if you want it. That does do that, and this might be an interesting source for people. Right here. You might want to take a screenshot of that. I just learned tonight, this is a free, this guy does this just for the yucks of it. You could give him a donation. And these are all different types of freebie computerized things. And in here is the metadata viewer, I think, that will then allow you to sort by audio file. If anyone does it, let me know.
I use his metadata wrangler.
Yes.
Sometimes I've entered photo contests and they do not want you to have any copyright data or any thing like that in there. And it can be really hard to get out. But
Yes.
the metadata of Wrangler is really good for that.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I was actually afraid to download them, although there's thousands of people who have them listed.
Yeah.
So I need to get back to where I was. Hold on one second. Are there people who want to hang in there? Where are we with people?
I
Bob,
vote yes.
or, Jay, would you like me to go on and people can just sign off when they want to sign off?
Sure.
I was going to go into multiple exposure and show you a couple manipulative things. So I won't be insulted if people want to sign off, but thus far it seems like everyone's hung in there. Thank you. So some of you may have seen that image. And some of you may have seen that. I believe I had this one in the summary for the year. And this is pretty cool. So I'll walk you through this. The guy from England, Jonathan Vanes, talked about doing in-camera multiple exposures. That's what this is. And the question came up about the colors. How do you get those colors from the image? And Bob had given some experience. But this is an image This is a 5-shot in-camera multiple exposure. And it's the stone of my fireplace. And this is as it appears after the image was taken. And now in Lightroom, it gets manipulated to that. That, and I can show you that if you're interested. And then that was taken into Photoshop and came back to Lightroom this way. And then that, and the process, this was duplicated in Photoshop about 4 or 5 times, twisted up and rotated and transformed, giving this. And then I took this and made a whole bunch of cuts, little pieces, and took all the pieces back into Photoshop and made these with the liquefy tool. And from that series of these, I then picked 12 and made this in Lightroom. And I made this to get it printed for from Dan Berg.
I want to know the last step. How did you do that in Lightroom?
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see if we can do this. So part of it is the blend mode in camera. You could take standard shots if you don't blend in camera and then put them into Photoshop and do blending there, but it's more complicated. This shot was done in the bright mode, and there are 4 modes in the R5 to do this. And bright mode means after you've taken your base image, the next thing you take, anything brighter will overlay what's darker. And then the next image, you turn the camera a little bit, take it again. Anything that's brighter yet will get rid of imagery. And you can do it planning it front or back. You can start with if you start with the brightest one in bright mode, then nothing's going to be brighter than it. So that doesn't work. So you have to start with in bright mode with your darker image, and then you build on that brighter pieces that you put in. The opposite would be true if you're shooting in dark mode. In dark mode, if you start it with your darkest object first, nothing's going to be darker than it to replace it. So in dark mode, you would start with the brightest object and now twist the camera, zoom in, zoom out, turn, and put in things that will replace, that are darker, that will replace some of the lighter things. And you build up the multiple exposure in camera. In addition to that, the technique that I used, that I was taught by 2 people from England, Valda Bailey and Doug Chinnery, who were kind of the founders of this, the inventors of this technique, is a white balance change from blue 2500 Kelvin to 9500 Kelvin, blue to warm to cold. And that also shifts colors within that. Jonathan Vaines didn't mention that part. So now I'm going to open up my program here. If we go into the develop module, and I'll make some basic adjustments and to this to fix I'll do it the way I normally do it, to fix the curve, the histogram in the upper right, where it should be, adjust the highlights, maybe play with the shadows. We'll do that right now. Work on texture, dehaze to your liking. There's no formula. I would never overdo texture like this on a normal image. On these kind of images, it doesn't matter. And now you play with the mixer. After you've done some color adjustments, let me just look at my, this one ended up as the last shot was 9,600, starting at 2,500, I think. Let's adjust that white. Adjusting white balance really does a huge amount to changing what you're dealing with. So I'll just for yucks do it to there. Now work on the HSL adjustments, hue, saturation, and luminance, and adjust these. And I just run through these back and forth, see if I like it. And for speed, I'll tell you that I didn't like any of the hue adjustments. The saturation adjustments, making different colors more or less saturated. This is the orange. And see what's happening here. Adjust it to taste. And again, there's no right or wrong here. These other saturations I'm going to leave alone. They ended up back at 0. I can test them and say, no, it really doesn't do a lot. Double click and bring it back. And the luminance. You can brighten these up as you want, which colors you want. And you really are affecting a change. I want to affect the orange, but it got too dark, so I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. Increase yellow a little bit. Now, I never in normal pictures work with vibrance and saturation. It's just not it's a very crude global process. But in these, you just trying to get some weirdness out of it. So I'm adjusting these. Now, let's see that red coming up? That's the red that we saw before. So now that's pretty close, done live, which is a little nerve-wracking, to my image here. A little different, but maybe this one's better. So now I would crop it at this point in time, bring it into Photoshop, edit in Photoshop. Yeah, okay. And now, can you see Photoshop? Oh, no, now you can't. You see Photoshop, Bob?
Yes, now I can.
Yeah, we do.
And now I'm going to duplicate this, which is Command J. Command J. And you can duplicate it as many times or as few times as you want. So now I have 4 layers of the same. Let's do one more. And I'm going to turn these off. And now we can see the background layer and the duplicated layer. And my goal now is to manipulate that. So I'm going to now Command T is the transform layer. Sorry, am I running out of space here? And maybe since there's a pattern here, I might want to line these up. So I'll say, okay, that one left 90 degrees. I'll turn the next one on. And Command T it. Let's go right 90 degrees. See if there's something maybe to line up. Turn that off, go to the next one. Command T. Maybe I want to zoom this one and rotate it. My mouse, I'm sorry, I'm messing up with my mouse here. And rotate it like that. So now I have those done, and now and right now you're not seeing all the effects, so we'll bring the last one up. And I would have probably labeled these. We'll Command T again. You can do whatever you want. You can shrink it, stretch it, rotate it just a little bit, and I'll do that. And I'm going to say, okay, that's done. So now I have all my layers here. And now the trick is to blend them. And you blend one to the other. So I'm going to blend these two together and pick a blend mode. And as you run through these, Jonathan showed us that they'll show you as you scroll. So now I'm going to blend this one in. And let's turn that off. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I like that one. I'm going to blend this one to that one at a time. Pick one that looks interesting.
I just want to add to everybody, this is addicting, so be careful.
Once you start, you just keep on doing. It's like ridiculous.
Days are
I'd
gone.
like
Yep.
to add that I've taken these classes that Vince is talking about, and he makes it look really easy.
Thanks, Jewel. And by no means am I an expert here. Okay, so just for yucks, let's say that's what I got. And now I have all four of these in this image, and it's different than I got the last time I did it because I didn't necessarily have all the layering done in the same fashion. We're going to save these back into Lightroom. Hurricane right there. Now that's in Lightroom. When I was practicing, that's what I got in my practice. And you saw what we just got a moment ago, doing the same thing. And now what I would do is duplicate this however many times you want to get cuts, 12 times. So I duplicate that, create a virtual copy. And now I have another one of the same thing, create another one, make a whole bunch of them. And now start making cuts.
When you say cuts, what do you mean cuts?
So that's a
Crops?
crop.
Crop.
So
Okay.
that image has that. This is what I did earlier today. That one did that. That one. Okay. So now I got three of them here. Let's show you all three. I have these three.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to bring them back into Photoshop. And now the fun begins. This is just craziness when you do this. So these three go in the Photoshop and you end up with this. So let's take these three. I highlighted them, right click, edit in Photoshop, not as layers, but just in Photoshop. Hopefully this works. Now is the fun, you go to liquify, and that's a filter. How cool was that?
There's the addicting part right there.
There it
Uh-huh.
is. That's the
Oh,
addictive
man.
part.
Hours doing this, and you can never repeat it.
It's even more fun if you have a picture of Angel up there.
Uh,
So that gets done repetitively. And you end up with, say, the three. One, two, that one, and that one. And now you want to make a triptych or 12 of them. Someone asked that I show this. Let's see here. So I'm going to do it with these guys. So in Lightroom, pretty easy. Excuse me, pretty easy. You go to the print module.
mm,
That's the secret.
there
And you
it
end up
is.
here and you tell it how many rows and how many columns.
So Vince, you're in contact option in the print module, right?
Single image.
Like you're gonna
Yes.
contact sheet?
Contact sheet. Yes.
Okay.
And this is a really cool feature. I've used this a number of times. You can adjust. You set up how many rows and how many columns you want and how big you want them to be.
Can you
And-
change the color of the background?
Yes, yeah. This is the stroke border. You want them tight together like that. Generally, you would put a space in between. And you can change colors. And you can change the background color to whatever you want.
And you had to pick those three and then you went over to the print module.
Yeah, you highlight whatever you want. So
Okay.
we can probably, let's see if it works this way. If I highlight more, I have to make more rows and columns, I guess. Yeah, so you can just keep on building it as much as you want. And then I ended up with that triptych.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so I should show you how you get that, because this is the trickiest part, believe it or not. It's like crazy that this is so difficult or not intuitive, shall I say. So say this is your, let's make this more normal. So say this is your final image. So now where do you go with it? And down here is the secret button, print to file. This gives you a choice of sending it to your printer or print to save it. And you're really not printing it. You have to give it a title. Test, what did I just do? What was that process? Oh, liquefy. And I'm going to save it to my desktop. And it will only save it as a JPEG, interestingly enough. So here it is, test liquefy. Now, I'm going to import it back into Lightroom. So to do that, I can't import from just a single file like that. It has to be in a folder. Not sure why. So now it's in a folder, or wants to be in a folder. There it is. It's in that folder, untitled folder. So then I would go to my Lightroom module library.
Mhm.
Isn't that cool? Shot, import, Mac, me, desktop, untitled folder, and there it is, and I would import it. And that's the file. And then you make your collection, which I use all the time. I don't need a new collection, but you would hit that for a new collection and hit this, or you go down to the collection from which my talk was, which was here. So I did this all within Lightroom to talk tonight. Now you can say set as target, which means that whatever image I choose now, I can send to that collection. So there's the image. And hitting the letter B adds it to the target collection. And these collections are lifesavers because it allows you to put together slideshows, maneuver things around.
Yeah, and it's not moving the images anywhere. It's just creating a collection of them.
Correct. If I take it out of this collection, it'll still be in my Lightroom folder. It'll actually tell me that. Remove from collection. Oh, well. I don't know why I did that. It almost always says it'll still be there. You're not removing it from your source.
From your catalog or your source.
So these are just real quickly other multiple exposures in camera. This is 9 exposures. Some of them I don't manipulate too much. It's almost what comes out of camera. Some get very manipulated. That's the Eiffel Tower. That's the Louvre. These are the Olympic rings in Paris. Each one of these is 5 shots. And little pieces taken out. That's a buildup in dark mode of Secrétaire, warehouse buildings, and a big mansion building up. So you can do a lot of neat stuff. And it's now 9. I guess we have to get out of the goggle works had we been there.
Yeah, I think Jay had to go because he had a little emergency at home. So I'm the host.
Okay. So I hope that was valuable and people enjoyed it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Great, thank you.
And wow, we held on to most.
Thank you so
everybody.
much. It was great.
Yeah, I
That
appreciate
was
that, Vince.
fantastic, Vince.
Yeah,
Thank you.
terrific, Vince.
You're welcome. There are things in the chat, so you might, before you sign off, I'll give you some minutes to click what's in the chat, the hyperlinks,
Yeah.
so that you could then go find them.
I'm actually super glad that this was done by Zoom, so I could actually hold my laptop up to my face so I could see all the details.
Well, you could actually, Angie, you could bring your laptop into the Goggleworks too.
That's a good idea.
Always sit up in the front at the Goggle Works.
Sit up front. Yeah.
Sit near the
I'm
front.
sorry,
you can-
Vince, Mike here. Good to see you.
Hi, Mike. Good to see you.
Yeah.
What's your question, Mike?
Not a question. It was just a thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
You sent me an invite, and it's very exciting to see this. And you got a nice group of friends there.
Indeed, I do. It's fantastic. It's my new life after retirement. Mike is my
You're
photo
not
buddy
retired.
from Ohio. He and our other buddy Dan from Denver are used to, before we got kind of old and things like that. We used to go on trips twice a year in Dan's camper out west. We have to get back to doing that, Mike. We haven't done that in a long time.
All for it. I'm going to sign off. You guys take care, and I absolutely enjoyed it.
Thanks for
Good, Mike.
visiting.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm signing off too. Thanks, Vince. Bye.
All righty.
Thank you, Vince. That was great. People can watch the recording and learn all over again.
Yep.